Was nuking Hiroshima and Nagasaki a war crime? Well, according to the laws of war the US itself adopted 4 years later, it clearly would have been. I'm Tony Curran, the editorial lead of AJ Plus, and I've been writing about nuclear weapons for the past 30 years. In the second week of August of 1945, the US killed more than 200,000 people in the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, most of them civilians. More than half died instantly, and the rest from wounds and radiation in the days and weeks that followed. 4 years later, the US signs onto a new set of Geneva Conventions that deem it a war crime to target civilians or to inflict disproportionate damage on civilians in a military strike. So it's a good thing for the US leadership that the 1949 convention didn't apply retroactively. Air Force General Curtis LeMay, who had transmitted the bombing order from President Truman, was later quoted as saying, "If we'd lost the war, we'd all have been prosecuted as war criminals." Questioning the decision to use atomic weapons against Japan was not uncommon among top US commanders at the time. General Douglas MacArthur, who had led the US war in the Pacific, insisted there had been no military justification for nuking Hiroshima and Nagasaki. US authorities certainly worked very hard to ensure that most Americans would never see the images recorded by their own military of the devastation wrought by these barbarous weapons. They blocked the release for decades of film and photographic evidence, fearing that these images would actually trigger such revulsion in the US public that it would turn Americans away from future use of nuclear weapons by the United States. This evasion of a moral reckoning with the US nuclear massacre of the civilians of Hiroshima and Nagasaki has actually persisted over decades. The US Congress forced the Smithsonian Institute to abandon plans for a 1995 exhibit to include photographs taken on the ground in Hiroshima after the bombing. Then House Speaker Newt Gingrich, who had challenged what he called efforts to make Americans feel bad about themselves by exploring the horrors of slavery and the genocide of the indigenous people, called the planned Smithsonian show un-American, saying it questioned the decision to drop the bomb and it emphasized Japanese suffering over American heroism. When Barack Obama visited Hiroshima in 2015, Washington's political class feared he might apologize for the US. Of course, he avoided any apology, simply talking about the horrors of war and the need for a world without nukes.
We may not be able to eliminate man's capacity to do evil. So nations and the alliances that we formed must possess the means to defend ourselves. But among those nations like my own that hold nuclear stockpiles, we must have the courage to escape the logic of fear and pursue a world without them.
Still, in a rather macabre irony, at the ceremony, one of his aides carried the US nuclear football, which contains the launch codes with which any US president, entirely on his personal volition with no institutional restraints, can instantly launch more than 900 nuclear warheads with a combined destructive power of 22,000 Hiroshimas.
All of a sudden, a strong flash came from the window side, and it's so bright, and the whole world is white colored. Even I can see it in my hand, and unbearably hot. I hit the floor, and big blast hit the whole school building.
If there was no military necessity, why did the US drop atom bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki? Despite what MacArthur and Eisenhower have said, the bipartisan political establishment still insists it was a swift and merciful way to end the war. Many historians believe it was a warning shot to the Soviet Union, and some see Truman's decision simply as a result of this devastating weapon being completed and now being ready to use. Many leaders in the global South, though, highlighted what they saw as an extension of colonial violence. Colonial violence had always justified itself to the Western perpetrators by dehumanizing the target populations. And sure enough, Japan's population was heavily dehumanized in US domestic propaganda during the war. President Truman, reflecting on his decision to bomb Hiroshima and Nagasaki, put it plainly, "When you have to deal with a beast, you have to treat him as a beast." Sri Lankan writer Michael Ondaichi, in his celebrated novel The English Patient, captured what was a prevailing view in Asia at the time, writing that they would never have dropped such a bomb on a white nation. Black American liberation poet Langston Hughes shared that view, and writing in 1953 as Western powers were losing ground in China, Korea, and Vietnam, He warned that it's going to be very hard for some Americans not to think that the easiest way to settle the problems of Asia is simply dropping an atom bomb on colored heads there. The 22,000 Hiroshimas in Obama's hand luggage highlighted the danger posed by America's ongoing institutional evasion of any serious conversation about the Hiroshima decision. Such a conversation would inevitably pose the question, under what circumstances and against what targets might the US again use nuclear weapons? US presidents carrying around the power to unleash 900 nuclear warheads at will highlights the peril we all face as long as any country possesses nuclear weapons. Remember, one of the explanations for the decision to use this consummate weapon of mass terror in 1945 was simply that it was there, that it was ready to use. And today there are thousands of nuclear warheads ready to use by any US president who deems it necessary, or the leaders of 8 other countries. So how safe should that make anyone feel?